Do violent video games turn people into violent people?
40 years of research, dozens of meta-analysis, a Supreme Court case, and we still can't agree.
So today, we crack that shell. Welcome to Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science. I'm Joey.
I'm Mike, and let's get into it.
Cracking that shell now. Abby, Ben, Mike, Joey, let's go.
Yeah. Cracking the shell on the mic, psychological science in sight. Abby bringing that fire, sparks when she speaks, ignition on sight. Been with the breakdown, mind state, takedown, never miss the details. Mike hitting concepts heavy like freight trains on steel rails. Joey steady mapping brainwaves, decoding how we feel. They turn that abstract real. Yeah, the knowledge is real.
They peel it back slow, layer after layer. Mind so deep, yeah, we ride that elevator.
So Joey, today we're going to tackle the controversial finding that violent video games lead to violent behavior. This has been a hotly debated topic, but why does this debate even exist? Give me the 30-second history.
Sure. So, we've probably recall Mortal Kombat, the video game, how popular it was. Still actually very popular today, but very popular 20 years ago. And children were playing it. Parents were nervous, freaking out that their kids were playing it, right? So you have games like Mortal Kombat, you have games like Doom, you have Senate hearings, you have politicians that are freaking out over digitized blood, and all of this panic was real enough to create what we know as the ESRB rating system that we still use today. This is the M or the T or the E letters that you see on video games today.
Right, and these letters are there to denote, what's the appropriate audience for these video games, right? And I guess, right, so as is oftentimes the case in this country, we tend to develop policies before the science is there. So now the science has caught up a little bit, right?
Right, and so psychologists by the name of Craig Anderson and Brad Bushman, this is kind of early 2000s, they built what's called the general aggression model. It's the idea that violent media activates aggressive thoughts, hostile feelings, and physiological arousal. So the thinking is that if you rehearse it enough, if you play enough video games, it shapes how you think and how you behave.
And so this initial study here, or at least this big meta-analysis they did, I guess supported to some degree, right, the claims that there was this relationship. So this is like maybe what kind of started some of the Senate hearings and so forth, right? So, but they put serious data behind it. So their 2010 meta-analysis and psychological bulletin included about 136 papers and 130,000 participants across Eastern and Western countries. That particular meta-analysis finds significant effects across 6 outcomes: aggressive behavior, aggressive thoughts, aggressive feelings, physiological arousal, reduced empathy, and reduced pro-social behavior.
Right, and so then the American Psychological Association, they run with this, with this research, right? They have policy statements, they have task forces, and the public message starts to be pretty consistent, right? It starts to be something along the lines of, yes, violent video games increase aggression, cause violence, etc.
Right, and that's basically been the headline ever since. So what went wrong with it, Joey?
Yeah, well, enter the psychologist by the name of Christopher Ferguson at Stetson University. He spent 15 years basically saying that the methodology, the methods of these studies do not hold up. And he levels 3 big criticisms. First, how is aggression actually being measured, right? So these lab studies, they don't actually measure what we would know as real aggression. They measure things like how much hot sauce a participant decides to give someone who doesn't like spicy food after playing a violent video game.
Yes, the classic hot sauce study. This kind of has some similarities to some of the other studies that we've seen pop up in the psychological literature that kind of use weird dependent variables that I think might open them up to p-hacking and other detrimental research practices.
Yeah, I mean, there's some logic to it, right? Because in the laboratory setting, you can't actually let people hurt each other. But does dumping Tabasco in someone's drink, does that translate to real world violence, right? That's a serious question.
That thing is about how we measure aggression, right? That's the first criticism is about how do we measure it? Are these valid measures of real world aggression? What's the second criticism?
Yeah, so it's this idea called publication bias. And, put simply, basically, this just means that studies that find an effect are more likely to get published. And, we know that the file drawer is full of null results that nobody will ever see, right? So these meta-analyses, they're pulling from a biased sample of the literature, the ones that are only published, right?
Right. And just to be clear, this publication bias phenomena is not specific to any particular area of psychology or, for that matter, any particular area of science. There's just a general proclivity for people to publish things that have positive results. And you can imagine this might be amplified to some degree in domains in which there might be some congruency between our intuitions and the effect that we're looking for, right? And I think in this case, the intuition that violence that you watch on TV or experience in a video game leads to violent behavior just seems so palpable and strong.
Sure, of course.
So what about the third criticism?
Yeah, the third is just the reality of confounding variables, right? So we're talking about, family environment or poverty, pre-existing aggression, mental health. And when you control for these factors, the effect often either shrinks dramatically or it even disappears.
Well, yeah, that's a problem. And the fact that we can't really randomly assign people to whether they're going to be playing violent video games or not, right? So from an experimental perspective, we can observe, we can do correlational studies, at least as it relates to real world violence.
Right.
But it's really hard to do studies in which you're manipulating these variables. The issue of establishing causality is very challenging. And okay, so these are all really, really important issues that kind of undermine the credibility of those results. So now we have two camps, right? We have this group of people who claim there is an effect, and we have another group that is saying, not so fast. The methodology doesn't hold up. Where do we go from there?
Yeah, here's where it gets interesting. There's a 2019 paper that was published in Psychological Science by Mather and Vanderweel. They tried to reconcile these kind of competing meta-analyses, right? And their finding is surprising. When you look at the full distribution of effect sizes across all the major meta-analyses, they're actually quite consistent. However, the effects are small, right? So typically, effect sizes between R equals 0.08 and 0.2, and they almost always point in the detrimental direction.
Okay, so let's put this into context, Joey. There's this thing called the common language effect size. In a common language effect size, essentially what we're doing is we're estimating the probability that a randomly selected person from the group of participants who play violent video games will be more aggressive than a randomly selected person from the group that doesn't play violent video games. In this case, if we translate that effect of violent video games into a common language effect size, that R equal 0.08 to 0.20, we basically get a probability that's somewhere between 0.53 and 0.56. To benchmark this, if the effect were exactly zero, this probability would be identical to a coin flip, or 0.5. In this case, we're scarcely above a coin flip. So it would seem that the camps aren't really disagreeing about the data. They are disagreeing about whether those small effect sizes matter.
Right. And so, it's not necessarily, video games cause violence versus it's totally fine. It's, there's a small but consistent signal. And what does that actually mean?
The most recent salvo in this debate is a 2025 paper in aggressive behavior by Miles, Novello, and Anderson. So what's the story there?
Right. So in 2019, a high-profile study by Zabilski and Weinstein, they pre-registered, they utilized open science, right? They had a big sample, and they found no effect of violent video games on aggression. It got a lot of press because of how rigorous it looked.
But Zabilski, did I say that name right?
Yeah.
Okay. They made the data publicly available, right?
Yeah, and exactly. And Miles, Novello, and Anderson, right, they went back in, they reanalyzed it, and they found that the original analysis was controlling for trait aggression when trying to predict state aggression. And these two constructs, they share so much variance that you're essentially kind of partialing out the dependent variable from itself. It's like predicting someone's temperature by controlling for their temperature.
Yeah, that might be a little bit of an overstatement, but I get the point here, right?
Right, right.
But I think it's a legitimate question. How do we control for that pre-existing trait level tendency to be aggressive, right? And I think this also probably gets to the heart and soul of this issue of we can't randomly assign people to play those video games, right? They're people self-selected to play video games. So are people who are sort of have a violent tendency to begin with, a more aggressive tendency, are they the ones choosing to play those violent video games? And that's why we see the effects. So the point here, though, I guess, is that when they reran the analysis without, controlling for trait aggression, the effect reappeared, right?
Right, it did. And, it's a striking finding, right? And so the broader lesson they're making is, open science and pre-registration, they're necessary, but not sufficient either, right? I mean, you can pre-register a flawed strategy.
Oh, this is absolutely true. But one of the benefits of open science and pre-registration is that you're making that data available for people to challenge the findings.
To scrutinize, exactly.
Right. So whether or not you agree with what Miles Novello and Anderson found, the fact that they're actually able to go in and reanalyze the data like this is a win for science. Okay, so here's what I keep coming back to, though, Joey. Video game sales have exploded over the last 20 years. There are an estimated 2.7 billion active gamers worldwide, roughly a quarter of the planet.
It's a lot of gamers.
It is. And over that same time, youth violence in the U.S. has actually gone down significantly.
Right. And, of course, this doesn't disprove a small effect, right? There's lots of factors that drive crime rate, but it's hard to square with such a strong causal narrative that often has been exemplified, right, and purported.
And some recent analysis, Joey, suggests that when you properly account for prior aggression, video game exposure might explain less than 1% of the variance in later aggressive behavior.
Wow, well, less than 1%. I mean, that's not nothing, but maybe kind of close to it. I mean, it's not nothing. It's close to it. But, when we compare it to things like, family violence or poverty or peer delinquency, it's just not where you'd expect to focus a public health campaign.
Right. I think this is a really good point, Joey. I'm glad you made that because, if we have to pick out something that we're going to invest in to reduce violence, that we're going to, do to improve youth mental health or, address violent tendency in youth, this might not be the most impactful investment of our money. And yet, every time there's a mass shooting, video games are literally on the front page within 24 hours in the news media. This is what we have to address.
Yeah, and I think it's, a lot of times we want a scapegoat, right? People want a legible scapegoat. And, the narrative that, someone who played violent video games or simply, that the person suffered from untreated mental illness, right? These are, easy explanations, right, for people to understand.
Right. And I'm just going to go a little political on us here. I don't like to do this on a show, but, I have to say when the politicians point to mental health as the preeminent explanation for these mass shooting events, and yet turn around and do nothing to help address mental health in America, and in fact undermine it actively by pulling funding from the important research that's done and the important foundations and centers that support healthy communities and mental wellness. I mean, it just blows my mind that on the one hand, it's a mental health problem, and on the other hand, let's pull the money that supports mental health. Okay.
Right. It should be a bipartisan issue that everyone should be focused on.
It absolutely should. Okay, so the bottom line is, Joey, I need to know, what does the science actually say here?
All right. So in plain language, here's my honest takeaway. Here's my honest read. One, there is a small consistent effect in the literature linking violent video games to higher aggression scores. It shows up across cultures and methods. And so again, just to reiterate, we see effect sizes, small effect sizes around 0.08, R equals 0.08 and 0.2. Again, these are real effect sizes, but they're small.
Right. And if I wanted to actually pick out someone who I thought maybe might be at risk for having violent tendencies based on their video game history, I mean, it's going to be really hard to do just
very
based
hard
on that, right? It's basically a coin flip. Better.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yep.
The second issue, though, is the effect is contested for legitimate reasons, right? Proxy measures, publication bias, the existence of confounding variables that are not controlled for. There are real methodological problems with this literature. The criticisms aren't just bad faith attacks on the literature. These are real criticisms.
And three, the real world evidence, again, that we observe just doesn't support a strong causal story, right? Again, crime has fallen as gaming exploded. And we said earlier, it's not necessarily evidence alone, but it doesn't seem to support that strong narrative that there's a link.
Okay. And I guess this is the fourth of our criticisms is individual differences matter, right? So someone with a pre-existing aggressive temperament and a rough home life may be more susceptible. The average gamer is probably not meaningfully at risk for developing these violent tendencies.
Yeah, so I think the scientifically responsible takeaway is this, that, we can say violent video games are probably a very minor risk factor for aggressive thoughts, aggressive feelings in the short term. But again, the narrative that they drive real world violence is just not well supported by the literature. Of course, dismissing the entire research area as junk science isn't right either. So there's a lot of nuance here.
Yeah. Well, we can come back to the topic of junk science at some point again, because I think there's plenty of it out there, and there's
That's
no
true.
lack of it in science right now. But right, so we can't dismiss all of it. On the other hand, the truth is that the effects are small, they're complicated, they're context dependent. We're not going to always get it right. The goal is that we're going to iterate towards truth at some point.
Absolutely, and that's right. Why we do what we do. Thanks for listening to Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science. I'm Joey.
And I'm Mike.
And see you next time.
This program is brought to you by fear. Blame the game, don't ask why. Turn the dial, watch truth fly. Simple answers, we got 3. No statistics, just TV. Are you tired of complex explanations like social context, family environment, or literally anything else that exists? Well, good news! Science, somewhere maybe, has confirmed that everything you don't like is caused by video games. Probably also snacks. And definitely Wi-Fi signals. We don't understand yet. Yes, our cutting-edge study found that when participants pressed a button in a lab, they were mildly more annoyed afterward. Civilization status at risk. Press start, lose control. It eats your brain and maybe your soul. Correlation? We don't need that. Just point at games and never look back. But wait, what about all those boring things like effect sizes and replication? Silence that thought immediately, because our experts agree. If a teenager plays a fantasy game and later spills cereal, that is scientifically indistinguishable from impending societal collapse. We now go live to a panel of experts. Could chess be next? Yes. Could Tetris cause architectural instability? We are monitoring the situation closely. And Candy Crush, let's not panic, but yes. But you can help! Simply blame the most visible technology available and ignore everything else. It's easy, it's fun, and best of all, it requires no additional thinking. Meanwhile, in reality, the data is complicated. Like, very boringly complicated! Crack the shell or don't try! Simpler stories always fly! Cracking the shell on psychological science, where nuance goes to die.
Hey, this is Mike from Cracking the Shell on Psychological Science. Just a quick thank you to all of our listeners. Joey, Abby, Ben, and I genuinely love putting these episodes together for you. If you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. It's free, and it helps us more than you might think. Got a topic you want us to dig into, or just want to reach out? Drop us a line at crackingtheshellinpsychology@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And for now, maybe take a break from the screens. Step outside and spend a little bit more time connecting with the people around you.